Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at our first VERTIC webinar on getting into nuclear policy. My name's Anuradha Damle, and I'll be chairing the event today. I'm a part of the verification and monitoring team at VERTIC. So this event is for anyone who is interested in how to break into this field. We've brought together a panel of experts from different parts of the community who are at different stages in their career with different pathways to their career to provide you some honest advice and answer some of the burning questions you might have. So hopefully, no matter what educational background you are or what stage you are in your career, this webinar will prove helpful to you. I'm very quickly going to introduce all of our speakers today, after which they will all speak in order, and then we'll have a Q&A session. But a few housekeeping things. First of all, if you have any thoughts about the webinar or want to tweet about it, please use hashtag VerticWebinar on Twitter, and our account is at vertic_org. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function that's at the bottom of the box. You can ask your question, and if you see a question that you really like, give it a thumbs up and it will move towards the top of the list. So without further ado, I'm going to quickly introduce our speakers in the order in which they'll be speaking today. So first of all, we have Adina Pintilli. Adina is a researcher specializing in applying open sources to research tasks at Ridgeway Information, a research consultancy in London. Her work centers around finding new tools and refining research techniques which have applications for the intersection of security and social issues. Most of her technical work, especially around automation, supports the UN's International Atomic Energy Agency. She's currently leading the creation of an online course for UN women. Her open source research supports the EU's European Asylum Support Office, the National Police Chiefs Council, and the UK Civil Service, and a number of private sector clients. She's also a mentor for Girl Security and an innovation fellow in this year's N² cohort. Our second speaker, Marian Mesmer, is the co-director of BASIC. Her expertise includes a breadth of issues in transatlantic security and conflict transformation, including strategic risk reduction, trust building, disarmament, diplomacy, and NATO-Russia relations. Marian leads on BASIC's risk reduction program, Stepping Stones to Disarmament, and the Gender and Nuclear Weapons program, as well as the communication strategy for the overall organization. She's also doing, at the same time, a PhD at King's College London, where her research focuses on trust building and cooperation in the relationship between Russia and NATO after the end of the Cold War. She has an MPhil in international relations from Cambridge and a BA from Mount Holyoke College. Before joining BASIC, Marian worked in a range of policy roles in NGO and local government. And finally, our third speaker is Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins, who is the director and founder of Women of Colour Advancing Peace and Security. Bonnie is the founder and executive director of WCAPS. She's also a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and a senior fellow at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. Bonnie is currently the chair of the Committee on Radioactive Resources, Applications and Alternative Technologies of the National Academy of Sciences. She's an adjunct professor at the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service and a professorial lecturer at the George Washington Elliott School of International Affairs. She's also a visiting scholar at the University of Pennsylvania Schools of Nursing and Veterinary Science. She recently served as a visiting fellow at the University of Pennsylvania's Perry World House and is a visiting dignitary at the LBJ School at the University of Texas in Austin. So thank you so much for all agreeing to speaking at our event today. And to begin with, we'd love to hear from you, Adina. Thank you.
Thanks for introducing us all, and thank you so much to everyone at VERTIC for putting this together. It's an awesome conversation to start in this community. And as someone who's recently entered into the nuclear field, I thought it would probably be best to use my time talking to you about what it's like to be a little bit of an outsider. So I actually came to the UK when I was 16, and I self-funded both of my degrees. So whatever Student Finance England didn't cover, I had to cover myself. So for me, actually, unpaid internships really weren't an option. I've since been there in rooms with so many people who've done so many of these things, and that simply wasn't an option for me, which is why I'm really glad that past me actually kind of worked up the courage to go to my favorite lecturer and say, listen, I think I need some research experience, but I don't know how to get it. Do you have any work that I could do for you? And it wasn't thrilling, it was very manual, but it was the first time I actually had that kind of experience. I was also super fortunate to be able to engage in my kind of year groups placement module. So I got to go and work for the EU as part of my degree, which was awesome. And I think I took away from that, and I really wish that a lot of people at the beginning of their careers tried something like that. You'd be surprised how much your lecturers or your seniors or the people at your college really want you to succeed. So going out there and asking for this experience is not going to cost anything, and quite a lot of times you'll actually be successful in getting it. I also learned really early on that trying stuff is probably the best thing that you can do at the beginning of your career. As I said, I was fortunate enough to work in the EU's polling division. So my background is actually in quantitative social science. Anything to do with big data was my jam. And whilst it was cool being in the Brussels bubble, I actually came out at the end of it and decided this is not for me. And I'm really fortunate that I tried stuff before I decided what works for me. I'd say that I actually came into nuclear the open source route. I interned at my organization before I did my master's, and then they kept me on. And afterwards, I was offered a full-time position. And I think being an outsider to this whole kind of nuclear field can be super scary, because everyone seems to have kind of a jargon that I never knew anything about. My only kind of connection to nuclear things was knowing that that's a security concern and maybe just a few lectures at university, but I wasn't necessarily so passionate about to write a dissertation on it. So I thought it would be really hard to sit in these rooms and have these conversations when I was working full time. And actually, it wasn't that bad. It's really quite great to be the person who doesn't know everything in the room, or to feel like you have to know everything in the room, because you'll be surprised how many people have unchecked assumptions. And you get to be that person who says, hey, that doesn't actually make sense. Could you just repeat that or explain what you mean? And that's actually a pretty fun place to be. I'm also super fortunate to have come into the field at a point where people are actually concerned about real change and doing the kind of change that matters. I had a really negative experience with a male supervisor when I started doing some work in academia around nuclear. And it was incredibly refreshing to come into the field and figure out there are so many organizations like, groups for women, groups for people of color, who are advocating for everyone's voice to actually be heard and be protected. So I'd say that if you want to join the field, now's a pretty cool time to join it, because there are lots of people doing good work to actually make this better. And I'm sure you'll hear so much more about this from Ambassador Jenkins and Marian, but it's awesome to hear that a lot of this work being done by places like WCAPS or Gender Champions in Nuclear Policy or N Square is really accessible. It's not actually written in the jargony stuff. So it will be really easy to join at a positive turning point in the field. So I'd say for everyone who's considering joining the nuclear field, take that leap of faith on yourself and ask maybe that lecturer or that role model whether they can help you and give you some experience, and try it. It might not be for you, but it might actually end up being something that you enjoy doing. I didn't think that I'd be so excited to do things around nukes, and I am. And it's actually really nice, and it feels really empowering to be so early on and be working towards things that actually make a difference. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Adina. I really enjoyed some of the things you talked about, actually. And one of the things that, personally, I'm very interested in is this idea of accessibility, both in terms of the content of the field and the jargon, but also just getting into it if you can't afford unpaid internships. So thank you so much for raising that. And I'm sure loads of people in our audience today will have questions surrounding the affordability almost of this field and how to get into it. It was also really interesting to hear you talk about how you approached lecturers and whether that was a thing that you were, maybe you could come back to this in the Q&A, but something you were particularly nervous about, because not everyone feels like they have that agency or the relationship with their lecturer. but also just how you came from a slightly different educational background as well. Thank you so much for your input. But I'd like to pass on now to Marion. Thank you, Marion.
Thank you, Anu, for the invitation. Thanks, VERTIC, for having us and for putting this webinar on. I think this is a really timely conversation. And thanks so much, Adina, for already starting us off with so many really important topics. So I'll pick up on a few of the things that Adina said, because the notes I had made for myself were somewhat similar in some aspects. So something that I was actually going to say at the end of my remarks, but that I'll put forward now because Adina already brought it up, is something that I think is really positive about the nuclear policy field, or I think security policy more broadly actually, is that the field has become noticeably more diverse. So I would say I entered the security policy world more broadly, probably in 2014, 2015. That was around the time that I finished my my master's degree. And in many ways, I think I still experience some of the sort of former culture, the like traditional culture that one associates with security policy. And while some of that is of course still around, what I'm noticing when I look at the younger generation coming just after me is that it is a much more diverse cohort, and that people are a lot bolder in asking for change and in advocating for change. And I find that amazing. I think that's really nice. And I really liked the point that Adina made about, if you're interested in it, just take that leap of faith. I think that's such a good point. Also, something I wanted to say at the beginning of my remarks is that I'll be speaking mostly about the UK, because that's where the bulk of my professional experience is at this point. So if you're an international candidate and you have some questions about, nuclear policy or security policy in a different setting, just maybe take it with a bit of a grain of salt, because employment stuff obviously varies a lot country by country. But a nice thing about the nuclear policy community is that it is a global community where a lot of these things are transnational and can be applied across the globe. And we have fantastic organizations like WCAPS, which started in the US and is now also in the UK. So a lot of these trends luckily are global, and I think that's a really nice aspect of being in such a network community where you can easily speak with colleagues from all across the globe. Something that I think has been going really well in the UK community in recent years as well is that unpaid internships are basically not really a thing anymore. So most organizations that I'm aware of, including my own, pay their interns, because I think it's one of those things where it was a part of the culture for such a long time, and then it just became really clear that it's unsustainable and that it's a way of keeping certain people out of the field. So my own entry point into the field wasn't through internships, because at that point they were still unpaid for the most part, and that wasn't something that I could afford either. So I'm the first in my family to go to university, and that just wasn't. I always worked alongside my degree, so there just wasn't really the opportunity for me to take on any internships while I wasn't also paid. So something that I would recommend to anyone who also finds internships inaccessible, or who's worried about picking up professional experiences or beginning starting out in their career, is to think about whether there are other ways how you can replicate that experience. So especially when you're in the beginning stages of your career, any experience is good experience, and it really does not matter whether you get that experience in an NGO setting or in a different setting. So, a really good way of getting some experience is through temp agencies and through part-time work, which you can find pretty much anywhere. You don't necessarily even have to be in London for that. I know that London itself is such a expensive and inaccessible place. So if you can get some experience in your hometown or in your university town, and that works out better for you, I think that's fantastic. And that really shouldn't be a deterrent from keeping you from applying for nuclear policy roles later on. Something else I would say is that a sort of common theme I've noticed from people who want to talk to me about getting into security policy work is that most people are motivated by the research experience they've already had, and by really wanting to sort of further the research that they do. And while that's great, and I mean I love research too, that's actually only a fraction of the skills that you would use in a think tank setting or in an NGO setting. So actually, you know, there are a lot of other skill sets that you can use throughout your career, and research is only a small part of it. So, you know, maybe think about other things that you enjoy doing or that you're great at, such as communicating or building relationships with people. Anything like that will be an absolute asset. And actually, especially if you're looking at joining a smaller team, being a really versatile candidate is going to be much more impressive than being a very specialized researcher. I think I'll probably actually leave it at that. And I'm really looking forward to everyone's questions, and I hope we can have a really rich conversation later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marion. Always a pleasure to hear you speak. And a really good point about unpaid internships. I mean, shout out to VERTIC as well, because I would not have been able to start my career a year and a bit ago. God, what is time? A year and a bit ago, had VERTIC not offered paid internships. So again, really good point raised there. Yeah, a good point about the field becoming more diverse. I know we talk a lot about how representation isn't always everything, but it is a good first step. And also I'd be interested maybe in the Q&A to hear a bit more about balancing quite a demanding job with education as well. Maybe any of our participants that are interested in that, please do ask questions about it using the Q&A function. You also mentioned WCAPs, which segues us very nicely into our final speaker, Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins. So thank you, Bonnie.
Hello. I hope everyone can hear me. It's very nice to be here. Thank you, Anu and VERTIC, for inviting me. And there's so much to talk about, and I have 7 minutes. And I have been in the field of weapons of mass destruction for almost 30 years. And so when we talk about how the field has changed, I can certainly say it's changed. It still needs more change. We're not there yet. But the way the field looked in the early 90s versus the way it looks now in the 2020s is vastly different. We certainly, you know, when I started out, I worked at an agency called the Arms Control Disarmament Agency, which was a US agency that was actually located within the Department of State. And that agency focused on, its main mission was to do arms control, non-proliferation disarmament treaties, to implement them, to negotiate them, to get them through advice and consent. And, you know, I was fortunate to be there, and I did, you know, I stayed there for many years, and I was able to get involved in quite a few treaties and conventions, and did a lot of implementation on all of the treaties we talk about: CWC, BWC, MPT, CTBT, CTBTO, OPCW, the whole alphabet soup. One of the things that was pretty much consistent through all of that was the fact that it was not particularly diverse. And I was very often started out as probably one of the youngest people. So that's another thing to think about, is the age gaps. And one of the only people of color and one of the only women. And so, you know, I didn't think about that before I got into the field. And I often tell people that I got so interested in the world of arms control that I just jumped in. I didn't really think about how diverse it was. I just said, this is something I wanted to do. And then after I got into it, it's like, wow, it's not very diverse, is it? But I still love the work. And, you know, I wasn't going to let that really stop me from doing something that I really loved. And what I've seen throughout the years, particularly in the last few years, is more of an increase in women. And, you know, I'm always reminding the young women who I see who are getting into the field, one, great that you're in this. I'm glad to see you here, and definitely stick with it. There, you know, there'll be always challenges, always folks who make you feel like you don't belong there, and, you know, always these things that are going to make you question, but, you know, always stay, you know, if this is what you love, to stick with it and stay in there, stay in the field. But also, you know, trying to increase diversity in terms of race and ethnicity in the field, which still needs a lot of work, to be honest with you. But certainly, you know, I'm seeing more people. It's a trickle, but it's certainly happening. And we hope to see more of that. We want it to continue, and so that the trickle becomes a flood at some point. And, you know, there's a lot of challenges in getting in, and we've talked about some of them, about internships or lack of internships or lack of paid internships. And so there's a lot of things that you need to do to navigate the field, to continue to stay in it, and to continue to find ways to go past the different obstacles that keep coming up as you progress in the field. One of the things that has been so important for me, you know, in starting WCAPS is to do some of that, and you know, to focus a lot on different issues of peace and security, but definitely highlighting this area of nuclear weapons of mass destruction issues, because it does need so much work. And, you know, doing things like the publications that we have and the panels, the discussions, and all that work. But it's something that we need to continue to do. And a little bit more about my background. I didn't do this work until I graduated from grad school. And the one thing I always knew I wanted to do is work in government. I knew I wanted to work in Washington, D.C. Beyond that, I didn't really know what I was going to do. So when I graduated and I got a degree in law and a master's in public administration, and I went down to Washington, and I worked in the Office of Secretary of Defense. And I had gotten into the program, into Washington, to a program in the U.S. called the Presidential Management Fellowship Program, which I would encourage my U.S. colleagues, if you want to get into the government, that's one way to do it once you get your graduate degree. But I didn't come in as a scientist. I didn't come in as a person who had a master's degree in international relations or politics. But I got into the field and as a lawyer, really, and in public administration. So you don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be deep in science to get into this field. There are pathways for scientists to get in, of course, but you don't have to be that to get into the field. And there's quite a few people who I have worked with who don't have that specialty. So, and I know a lot of people feel as if, when I talk about arms control, they automatically say, oh, I don't have that background. I have that scientific background. And I remind them, you don't have to have a scientific background to be in it. So, and try not to get people discouraged. One of the things that I also try to highlight, one of the things that I've learned having gotten into this field from a quote unquote non-traditional way of getting into the field, is that the concepts are not as complicated as people like to make it seem. You know, and we're talking about peace and security here. We're talking about reducing WMD so that we can have a peaceful world, so that we don't have accidents that can create problems, and that we can have, you know, security for bio issues, so that we don't have an infectious disease that's done intentionally, so that we don't have bombed chemical weapons in Syria. I mean, these are the kind of things that are real that people can see. So, you know, to help people understand that it's not this deep concept, that it affects everyone around the world, and you can relate to things a lot easier when you can connect to things that people are seeing, so that people don't feel so concerned about getting into the field, or that they can't get into the field because they don't have the specialty. The last thing I would say is, you know, as I said, I have a very varied background. I love school. I have maneuvered the school work through all of my life. So happy to talk about how do you balance going back to school, if you like school a lot, with working 9 to 5 if you actually like the work that you're doing. It can be done. It does mean making a few sacrifices, but it can be done. And I would just encourage all of you, regardless of your background, if this is something you want to do, to pursue it, because we need new voices, we need young voices, we need diverse thinking. You know, in the US, for example, we need to get people who are not in the Washington, D.C. area. We need people around the US, and probably the same in other countries outside the capitals. And so we need diverse of you know, race, gender, thought, perspectives, and we can't have that unless people are willing to come into the field. So I think I'll leave it at that, and happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Ambassador Jenkins. I'm always happy to hear you talk about WCAPS, no bias at all. But thank you so much. I can see we've had a question come in, but I'd like to encourage more people to ask more questions if they could. And I was wondering if I could actually start the discussion off touching on something that Bonnie brought up, and it was to do with educational background. Now, this field is rather wide, and I know that we've got a lot of students on this call who don't have a first job or internship yet. And, you know, I came from a weird background to end up in where I am now. I mean, I don't think it's weird, but I had a physics and then a science policy background. So what would you say in terms of specific educational backgrounds for the variety of roles in this field? And perhaps, Marion, if you wanted to go first, And then Adina and then Bonnie, if you'd like to join in.
I mean, I think maybe it's a bit different if you're very early career and you need to kind of show what your rationale is for getting into the field. But I really don't think you need any particular degree in order to make it. First of all, there is such a range of different roles in the field. As I kind of mentioned earlier, I know a lot of people have a very sort of narrow or specific idea of what they want to do when they get into the field. But so, you know, like I'm a citizen, so I can't work in UK government if I want to work in security policy. So I've been focusing mostly on NGO roles and sort of university roles during my time in the UK. But if you look at the whole gamut, which obviously starts in civil society, so like universities, NGOs, think tanks, and that sort of thing, all the way through to government, military, or then the sort of industry side. There are so many different jobs or security related jobs that I really don't think there is a single educational background. I think there's a range of skills that are always going to be helpful in your career. So focusing, I think, on skills over degree type or sort of area of study is probably a lot more useful. And I'd say, you know, some of the skills that are really transferable and that will come in useful regardless of whether you're in government or in a think tank or in a university setting or in industry is, you know, being a team player, just being someone in a team who can support colleagues and who knows how to build relationships, being a really good project manager, you know, just being really organized, knowing how you can delegate stuff to people and checking in with them in a way where they feel heard and not steamrolled. Being a good communicator, you know, writing well for an audience that isn't versed in the technical language that might. And then sort of beyond that, you know, especially if you're interested in NGO and civil society work, being a good fundraiser, because, you know, there's that we do every single day. So I'd say, you know, those are just some of the transferable skills that are going to be way more important than whether you studied English or history or international relations, you know, or whether you actually did one of the specialized master's degrees that, you know, people tend to do if they want to move into this field. So I'll probably leave it at that.
Thank you, Marion. Bonnie, Adina, sorry, would you like to go next and then Bonnie?
Sure. I'll actually just add that we have made a conscious decision in our latest intake of research assistants to take people who don't have backgrounds in politics and IR, and it is awesome. We have anthropologists, we've got someone who's studying art. It doesn't actually matter because these things affect us all, and it's really interesting to see how well this works in a team because people ask different questions and it really is about different skill sets. And I just want to pick on something that both Marion and Bonnie were saying earlier. It does actually, in the nuclear field, there are so many roles that you can get involved in that, you know, you might be a designer for publications, you might very well be a spokesperson, you might be someone who helps create educational content, you could be someone who writes policy. But the reality is that a lot of the organizations in which you'll be involved are probably none of them, I mean, a very, very small percentage of them are so big that you will only be doing research. So being a versatile human is going to only serve you well.
Yeah. The only thing I would add, because I think this answer has been, the question has been answered thoroughly. So I just add for like a minute is to pick up on this idea of being versatile. And, you know, when I look at the type of threats that we have, that we're dealing with right now, and the next generation will be, you know, inheriting in the following generations, you know, these are threats, not just in the nuclear field or bio and chem and our issues, but these are all areas that are obvious fields of issues that are global. And there are a lot of connections, and people don't really think about the connection of like nuclear to other issues. You know, I think it's easier to see like biosecurity, biosafety, infectious disease, there's a connection there, you know, and so it's a lot easier in some, but I think, you know, people need to think about how all of these issues are connected to global challenges and how we as governments, as citizens, as a global community have to be able to understand how we deal with these threats, working together globally, and how threats do build on each other and connect to each other. So I would say the word adaptability, or at least have an understanding and appreciation for how issues you're working with are impacted by other issues. Just having, and it's not that there's an education necessarily for that, but having maybe a liberal understanding and a more strategic view about the issues that you do work on, and having a willingness to see how they are impacted, how these issues are impacted by other things. So.
Fantastic. Thank you all for that. We're going to move to the Q&As now that are in the box. Thank you for putting your questions in. I'm going to switch up the order in which I ask them, because I think the two last questions go really well together. And then the first question by Emily is a bit further on, I think. So we'll start with the first two questions. So combining them, I think, a little bit, but starting with the anonymous attendee who has graduated from a master's, done unpaid internships, and is struggling to find work. Sustaining yourself without a job. Now, this is something I find myself in the position of for 6 months. And, I found cafe jobs and whatnot and kept myself going, but I used the online community on Twitter and loads of different groups that exist online to try and engage myself. But I'd love to hear a little bit from Marion, Bonnie and Adina, perhaps Bonnie first, Adina, and then Marion, on that, and connecting that on how we look for internship and job opportunities, particularly in the UK. Let's go with Bonnie first, then Adina, and then Marion, please.
Great. And, I think that you kind of set the stage, because I know in whatever times in my life when I was looking for something else or not yet had something, I always have to stay busy. I always have to be doing something. And I actually work better when I have several things going on at once. So when I have nothing going on, I'm really going crazy. And so I always have to find something to do. So, doing those part-time jobs or things to sustain yourself, because we do have to have money to survive, and that's the reality. So, finding ways to get that income while you are looking for something else is a part of life, and everyone goes through that at some point. So if that's where you are, don't feel discouraged. Everyone has that happen, and everyone finds a way to get past it. But it just means being active and proactive to get out there and find things that you can do to get the money going while you're looking for something else. And while you're looking for something else is the important part. And this connects to the second, which is finding the jobs and opportunities. And I have found, for example, we have a listserv at WCAPS. And what I find amazing is the amount of internships and jobs that come across that listserv. And what it's taught me is that a lot of it is, knowing people who are who know about jobs, letting people know that you're looking for work. Because I have found that when people know you're looking, when they find out about a job, not necessarily in their own place, but if they find that somebody's looking for work, they know to let you know. So let people know I'm looking for work, what kind of work you're looking for, being very vocal, going on the internet, looking for things religiously, going to different organizations, because sometimes they don't advertise, going to organizations and looking in their career page or their job page. So being proactive while you're doing those things that you need to do to make the money, and just staying active and joining listservs, or joining, being on LinkedIn and all those kind of things, I think are really important, because like I said, the jobs you don't always know where they are, but they're kind of out there, and you just got to figure out the best way to get that information.
Adina, please.
That is exactly how I found other opportunities. I just said to people, listen, I need a job. Do you have anything for me? And it works. And that's exactly, a lot of people who now have an opportunity to work in the field feel quite passionate about broadening the field. And why would we not want to attract good people in this field who have so many skills? So on that, I would say that it's really important to have a peer network. The people who are like at your level and just a little bit above you, they probably have way more opportunities than you think. And it's really worthwhile telling, your friend who works at a think tank or at an NGO that you are looking for work. And in the meantime, kind of following on from what Bonnie said, we do have to pay bills. And I think it's really important to remember that you can repackage those skills and show someone in the nuclear community that the fact that, you know, like me, you waitressed for however long means that you are really good at interacting with people. You are very good under pressure situations. And those are skills that are just as important. Thanks.
Thank you. Marion.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with everything that's been said already. And I would just add, you know, it's so real that you just need a job. We've been talking a lot about sort of, you know, service industry jobs, which are totally legitimate. And as Adina said, really build your skill set in other ways. But I'd also add, you know, there are a lot of other office type jobs that you may not be applying to, or that you may be overlooking because you're really focused on getting into security. And especially when you're early career, or even at any point, you will learn so much from working in a different type of organization that you can absolutely apply to your applications when you then find the security opportunities that you want to apply to. I mean, I think the field is looking a bit dire at the moment due to COVID, but also generally, this is a slow field for hiring. It's fairly small. You know, there's only a handful of organizations. For many of the NGOs, hiring is always tied to getting new project grants in. So this is unfortunately never really the kind of field where there are several openings posted in one organization, or where there's just a steady stream of opening. So I think one of the realities is, if you want to make a career for yourself in security, you know, in peace, in development, in any work like that, there will be times where you need to think creatively about how to build your skills and how to sidestep. So, you know, thinking about functional career areas that aren't necessarily tied to your security expertise or your specialist expertise, I think is a really good way of getting some experience. So my very first job out of uni was as a project manager for a publishing company. I didn't particularly love it. It really wasn't what I was expecting. And at the time I was really doubting myself, because I was worried that, you know, if I didn't manage to get a job in policy quickly, that I would become less of an interesting applicant. But I really could not have been more wrong. You know, the professional experience that I got there really opened doors later, because I could show that I was a skilled project manager. And similarly, you know, I've worked in policy areas that are more domestic focused, and a lot of the skills that you pick up are really transferable. So rather than looking at the same 5 organizations that you really want to work for, maybe broaden your search a bit and think about what skills you have, or what things you enjoy doing on a day-to-day basis, and seeing if you can find a job in something like that while you wait for the right opportunity to come up in policy. And you are absolutely going to be a better applicant for it, because you are going to stand out favorably in comparison to people who have just finished their education, or, you know, who maybe have done some internships but haven't had more long-term jobs, that sort of thing.
Thank you so much, Marion. And actually, I just wanted to add a little bit of an answer myself, because I graduated and then had about, I would say, just under a year where I was desperate to find work in this field, and I couldn't afford to not work. And so I, as Adina said, you know, I waitressed, I tutored, but I also had decided that I was going to be a little bit shameless. And I used online platforms like Twitter to try and find people who could give me advice and drive to keep going. And actually, Marion and Bonnie were both people that did this for me, and showed me that there were opportunities in organizations such as WCAPS that existed that I could engage with. And VERTIC, which is where I work now, was actually probably my 12th job application that was narrowly specific to what I wanted to do, and about 60th overall. And it's exhausting, and it's an exhausting process, but because there, as Marion said, are few jobs, but as long as you can keep yourself going, which, you know, easier said than done, especially during a pandemic, you will find something that works for you. And the one other thing I wanted to add is, what I'm getting from this is that it might be good for more of us to tell our stories about how we got to where we are, just being very blunt and being like, yeah, I didn't just fall out of university and land an amazing job. No, I had to struggle. I had to do lots of things that were difficult, but actually gave me a skill set that made me better at my job now. So thank you very much, all of you, for your answers. We're going to move to Emily Enright's question now. And this is moving forward a little bit in terms of career progression, and it's talking about moving from an early career to a mid-career stage. So it's to do with skills and experience, but also perception, and also advice on specializing versus generalizing. So I actually want to say that based on what Emily's talked about, we are hoping to have a webinar in the new year which talks about the second step of this. So it's all well and good to get a job in the field, but how do we keep people in the field and how do we keep them happy? And hopefully that second webinar will take place early next year. So if you're interested in that too, then do come along. But for now, if you could answer these questions. So again, coming back to it, it's perception and skill set to do with moving from early to mid-career. I'd like to learn about that too. And also specializing versus generalizing. So actually, I think it makes sense if we go with Bonnie, Marion, and then Adina last, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you for the question. Good question about moving through the career, and it's interesting when just briefly on WCAS we started having meetings. We had a lot of meetings that focused on, getting into the field, and then we started hearing from some of our mid-career members who said, "What about us?" I mean, we have challenges too. It's not just getting in the field; it's the challenges that you have later in life, and it's very true because there's always going to be challenges. They just change, and so the challenges of getting into the field is one, and that what we're talking about now. But even when you're in, there's still imposter syndrome, and I think it even increases as you've been in the field, because then you have to struggle with how do you deal with, okay, I've gotten to a certain place, but I'm still feeling as if I don't belong here, or if somehow there's a fluke, that I'm here by some miracle and I really don't belong, and so you have that, and you have other challenges that happen when kids and things like that. So there's all those kind of things, and those can also be daunting. And if not, if people don't feel that if they've managed them well, they may leave the field. So I think it's really good to have a support system. It's really important to have people who can understand the changes in the terms and the types of things that you're dealing with when you go from early to mid-career. And who are also in that space at that time, who are also sharing those kind of challenges. And so that's also a part of it is, how are you maturing with your friends? Because, people have different things in life. You're all starting out the same, but then people have different challenges as they mature and different decisions that they make about their lives. So you may not be in the same space as you are with the friends who you had at the beginning. And so you may need other people to also augment them who can help you with some of those different changes that you're having, if you have kids and and they're not having kids yet. So this is practically people don't think about very often, but that also mean, because you have some of the basic things about, like I said, imposter syndrome, but there's other things in life that happen in a mid-career that you just don't have early on. So having a support system is really important to keep you going and keeping you staying in the field for whatever challenges. As far as being special or general, I think it's, there's two things. One, it used to always be you have to have a specialization, and that was it. I still think you do. I still think it's important to have something that is your thing. When they see you, they see a person, this is what they do. This is their passion. This is what they spent a good deal of their time working on. Having said that, and I think that will help you, particularly as you go on through life, to have something that is yours, something that you can sell and say, this is my thing, hire me because I'm an expert in this. On the other hand, it's always important to be a journalist in a sense, because you don't want to ever be so pigeon-toed and so focused that that's all you do, and it goes back to what I said before about having an appreciation and understanding of the field itself. And those are things that may touch on you on what you do that you don't have an expertise in, but that, you are understanding how it connects, because that'll make you a much better person at your field, in your field, if you can understand those things. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Bonnie. I'm aware that we've only got a couple of minutes left, but I think a question that's come through in the chat from Susanna to do with Emily's question goes really well with the fact that Marion is answering next. And it's on when best to pursue a PhD if you don't aim for a traditionally academic career. So if Marion, you could incorporate that, then that would be awesome. Unfortunately, this is the last question we'll be answering, but then, so if Marion and then Adina, please.
Yeah, sure. I'll try to be really quick. So again, I'll have to say that this is like a very UK specific answer. And if this is something you're considering and you don't necessarily want to do a PhD in the UK, just message me on the side and we'll talk about it via email. So in the UK, it's really hard to get PhD funding. So one thing I would say is that the more attractive of an applicant you are for a PhD program, the better. And getting a few years of career experience under your belt so that you know exactly what you want to get out of the degree, and just so that you stand out from the field of applicants a bit more is a really good thing. So I know some people have sort of said that they could tell that they were at a natural career stage to get a PhD because they felt that they were coming up against a ceiling when they tried to get promotions or when they tried to change jobs. So that might be something. It might also be that, you know, while you've been working for a few years, you finally found that one question that you really want to answer. And that's why you decide to do a PhD. And then another reason might be that there is just a great paid PhD opportunity, you know, that's with an academic who you really respect, or that's in a team that you really want to work with. And that's why you decide to go for it. Generally, though, I would say that even in NGOs and think tanks, there are very few roles for which you have to get a PhD in order to make a career. And for most job applications I've seen, you can always substitute the PhD for experience. So it's not a must, but it can be a really nice thing to do. And there are lots of things that I've really gained from my PhD process and that I'm really enjoying about doing a PhD. So don't feel you have to do it. And there are different ways of going about doing it when you decide to do so. Thanks, I'll leave it here.
Thanks, Marion. You've been very, very helpful to many of us, including me, when talking about this. So thank you very much. And finally, Adina, please.
I'll just add to these awesome remarks that as someone who's going from early and hoping to move into mid-career in this field, you actually have a lot of agency. I know that someone who manages me, manages budgets, writes proposals, that kind of stuff. There is nothing in small organizations, especially, stopping you from saying, this is the kind of stuff I want to do. I would like to be involved in this. I want to work with a solicitor. And I mean, you don't ask, you don't get. I've asked for some things and got them really quickly. I've asked for other things and got told, you don't actually have enough experience for this, but we can work towards it. So letting your kind of mentors know and the people around you know that this is what you want to do has a lot of benefit to it.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to all of our amazing panelists. The engagement we saw suddenly at the end shows that people are really, really interested in what you're talking about. So thank you to all of our attendees as well. Please keep an eye out on our website, vertic.org. Follow us on Twitter, vertic_org, to see more about the work we do, and engage with our future events. We're hoping to have a few more webinars next year, both on more community matters and specific technical issues. So it might be something you're interested in. Check us out. Thank you again to our speakers, Bonnie, Marion and Adina. A virtual round of applause for you all. And please do feel free to follow them on Twitter and tweet them your questions if we didn't get to you with the hashtag VERTIC webinar, and hopefully they'll be able to answer you. But thank you once again, everyone. Take care and keep well. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.